There was a kestrel, and it was sitting on top of a tree. Now, I was standing on a path, and the tree was in the middle of a field, so I couldn't get too close to it, and the sun was setting behind the kestrel, meaning the kestrel was quite dark on one half, and then kind of orangey on the other half from where the sun was setting, and it was going to make an awesome photo. Now, I'd been waiting for about half an hour with this camera setup. This is the Canon 7D Mark II and Sigma 150 to 600mm lens, and as you can see, it's a very big camera setup. Now, as I'd been standing there for quite a while, my arms had begun to ache, and I didn't want to be standing there for too much longer, when a couple came up to me and they were asking, "Oh, do you know what that bird is? What are you photographing?" So I told them it's a kestrel, it's sitting on top of the tree. They were like, "How do you know?" I was like, "Because I can zoom in on my lens," even though I had identified it from quite a distance. And they were talking to me, it was lovely, we were having our little conversation while I was keeping an eye on the kestrel, because whenever someone comes up and talks to me while I'm photographing wildlife, I do have that fear that they're going to distract me or the wildlife and we're going to miss the shot, which is exactly what happened. They were busy talking and the kestrel flew away, which was exactly the shot I wanted. I wanted to get the kestrel jumping up from the branch and flying off. Now we missed that shot. I saw the kestrel fly across into the background, and then I was kind of watching the sky while we were talking, and I never saw it fly across the sky. So after we finished up the conversation, I walked down to the trees just before where this bit of sky was that the kestrel never flew across, and we found the kestrel again, which was exciting. I love going out and re-finding wildlife that you've lost. It's very satisfying. And so the kestrel was now deeper into a tree. It wasn't very isolated. There was lots of foliage around it. I took some photos, and it was facing the sun, meaning we have beautiful light on this kestrel. It's a very nice photo, but it wasn't my taking flight photo. And the kestrel sat on this branch for even longer. There was a couple who did come and talk to us very briefly, but the kestrel wasn't showing any signs of movement. I was looking out for things like ruffling their feathers, pooing, because that does mean the bird's preparing to take off, little signs which say the bird's going to fly. These never happened, until the bird did fly. It dropped down to the ground, clearly trying to hunt something. Now, unfortunately, there was a bush in front of me in this field, and one of the branches got in the way of the perfect photo. So here is the photo that we got of the kestrel, but it's kind of faded out by the bush. I took it into my editor, I tried to sort it out. Here now you can kind of see the kestrel a bit more, but what I'm trying to say is that we waited a long time for this photo and never got the ideal photo, but that is the story of being a wildlife photographer. So today we're going to be talking about the things you need as a wildlife photographer, and I'm not talking equipment, I'm talking qualities, mental things, like the little mind games that you need to actually succeed as a wildlife photographer, because believe it or not, it's as much of a mental sport as any other. To be a wildlife photographer, you need patience. Now, this is universal. You will always need patience for wildlife. You see, unlike in a studio, you can't control the wildlife. The wildlife will do what it wants, and you have to fit in with that. You have to go out and capture whatever the wildlife wants to do on their terms. And if they don't like what you're doing, they will leave because they are scared of us. They will run away. And that is very frustrating. But you will learn, with patience and commitment, you will learn what the wildlife accepts and doesn't accept. And that is one of the things you need to develop if you want to become a good wildlife photographer. Another thing you need is willpower. You need the willpower not to quit. When a photo doesn't go your way, like the kestrel photo, you've got to just go out and carry on. Just because you failed once doesn't mean you're going to fail again. But the wildlife will keep presenting itself. Unlike in a studio, if I did a shoot with a model in this studio and I did a terrible shoot, well, that model or the company is unlikely to come back to me because, you know, I did kind of mess up that opportunity that I had to prove myself. Wildlife doesn't care. Wildlife isn't going to stop coming out because you're a bad wildlife photographer. Wildlife will keep coming out and you constantly get the chance to practice and develop your skills. And this is something which I think is very important. You've got to keep going out, even if you go out and you find nothing. I've gone out many times and come back with absolutely nothing. But then I'll go out once and I'll come back with 3 amazing photos. And that feeling is incredible. It's just about keep on doing it, even if it's not being very rewarding. And you've got to be willing to go out when you don't want to. Early in the mornings, it might be cold, it might be dark in the winter, you know, it's very miserable, and you may not want to go out, which I can totally relate with. But if you don't go out and you just stay in bed, then that wildlife that's there is going to be missed. And early in the morning, as a poll showed, is the best time to do wildlife photography. You guys like the lighting in the morning, and that's because the golden hour is incredible. Furthermore, there's more wildlife out in the mornings, because in the mornings there's less disturbance. The birds can get up, and they can do all of their singing, their feeding, while people aren't out, while dog walkers aren't around, you know, while there is less disturbance. Bad weather is another example of when, if you get up and go out in bad weather, you're getting one up on every other wildlife photographer. Every wildlife photographer that stays indoors when it's raining is not going to get the shot that you can get outdoors when it's raining. You're giving yourself more chances to get that good wildlife photo and to learn how to take a better one next time. Obviously, when it comes to going out in bad conditions, you do have to be careful of your equipment, because the last thing you want to do is damage your equipment because you're trying to develop your skills. Because then your equipment will be damaged and you can't develop your skills. And the last tip is to think like the wildlife, which is very difficult because as humans we think nothing like wild animals. However, if you want to get close to, if you want to understand the behaviours, if you want to see the signals of wildlife, you need to think like the wildlife. Again, the more you go out and the more you do it, the more you will see these behaviours and you will recognise them to mean certain things. Even if you don't think you do, you will. And this will really help you with your wildlife photography because it means you will be able to go out and identify things and you'll know where to put yourself when you can push, when you can't push. These things can only be achieved if you think like the wildlife. If you think like a human, then you're probably going to be slightly more arrogant, slightly more confident, slightly more everything the wildlife isn't. To do wildlife photography, you need to be discreet. You need to be relatively shy of scaring the wildlife. You need to be quiet. You need to become one with the environment that the animals are in. That way you can really progress your wildlife photography and actually get the opportunities that you can't if you see it from a human standpoint. Now I know all of these points could be a bit confusing and you're like, well, how can I do that? You know, with equipment, you just buy new equipment, you take a better photo. But what I'm trying to say is that the photo and the equipment are great, but it is the photographer that makes these opportunities to take the photos. The equipment increases the chances of getting the photo, but it doesn't make any wildlife opportunities. That is you as the photographer. And so developing your skill to create opportunities for wildlife photos, that is going to be your best bet at getting better wildlife photos. And so it's been quite a chilled one today. I hope you've enjoyed the video and you found it helpful. If you have, please hit that like and subscribe. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments down below and I will try and get back to you. I will see you in the next one.